This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to part 1.
You will hear a man inquiring about joining a wildlife conservation society. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6 on page 2. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Wildlife Conservation Society, good afternoon. Can I help you?
Oh, hello. Yes, I'd like to join, please.
Oh, yes, certainly. I'll just get some details from you. Could I have your name?
Michael Jones.
The caller's name is Michael Jones, so Michael Jones has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Wildlife Conservation Society, good afternoon. Can I help you?
Oh, hello. Yes, I'd like to join, please.
Oh, yes, certainly. I'll just get some details from you. Could I have your name?
Michael Jones.
Right. And can I ask where you heard about us? Was it in an advert, or did a friend tell you, or...
Neither, actually. It was a radio program. Then I just got your number from the phone book.
Oh, right. Now I need some membership details. It's Michael Jones, and the address?
21 Beale Street.
Okay.
Leeds.
Fine. And do you know your postcode?
Yes, it's LS14 2JW.
Okay. And do you have a daytime telephone number we can contact you on?
Yes, you can call me at work. The number's 011-73-586-42. And I can give you my office email address if you like.
That'd probably be useful. Yes, please.
It's mj@hennings.co.uk.
Is that HENNINGS?
That's right.
Thank you. Now, I just need to ask you some questions about exactly what you want. First of all, how long do you want the membership for? We do 2, 3 and 5-year memberships, and we also do one for life.
I think I'll just get the minimum length this time round.
Fine. And then the type of membership. We do single, joint or family, which covers up to 4 children.
Well, we haven't got any children. But I think I'll get the joint one because my wife will probably want to do the activities with me.
Yes, fine. Let me see. That'll be £49 altogether then, please.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10 on page 2. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
How would you like to pay?
By direct debit?
No problem. I just need your bank details. Can you give me the name first?
It's the Union Bank.
And now I've got your name, but I need your account number.
01059612.
Okay. When would you like to start payment? Next month, on the 1st of October, or...?
Can you make it the 15th instead?
No problem. The membership will begin then too. Is that all right?
That's fine.
I'll just give you a reference number in case there's any problem. Have you got a pen?
Yes.
It's JYZ37. And we'll be sending you an information pack within a few days. Is there anything else?
Oh, yes. Could you send me an additional one? I've got a friend who's very interested.
Certainly, no problem. I'll make a note of that. There's also a video we can send you if you like. There's no charge.
Yes, please. That'll be great.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You will hear an expert on picking wild mushrooms called Dan talking on the radio. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
This evening, we're delighted to welcome Dan Beagle, who's just written a book on looking for and finding food in the wild. He's going to tell us everything we need to know about picking wild mushrooms.
Thank you very much. Well, I need to start by talking about safety. You really need to know what you're doing because some mushrooms are extremely poisonous. Having said that, once you know what to look for, it's really worth doing for the amazing variety of mushrooms available, which you can't get in the shops. But of course, you have to be very careful, and that's why I always say you should never consume mushrooms picked by friends or neighbours. Always remember that some poisonous mushrooms look very similar to edible ones, and it's easy for people to get confused. The other thing to avoid is mushrooms growing beside busy roads, for obvious reasons. But nothing beats the taste of freshly picked mushrooms. Don't forget that the ones in the shops are often several days old and past their best. There are certain ideas about wild mushrooms that it's important to be aware of. Don't listen to people who tell you that it's only okay to eat mushrooms that are pale or dull. This is completely untrue. Some edible mushrooms are bright red, for example. Personally, I prefer mushrooms cooked, but it won't do you any harm to eat them uncooked, in salads. It's not necessary to peel them. Another thing you should remember is that you can't tell if a mushroom is safe to eat by its smell. Some of the most deadly mushrooms have no smell and taste quite nice, apparently. Finally, just because deer or squirrels eat a particular mushroom doesn't mean that you can.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Of course, mushroom picking is associated with the countryside, but if you haven't got a car, your local park can be a great place to start. There are usually a range of habitats where mushrooms grow, such as playing fields and wooded areas. But you need to be there first thing in the morning, as there's likely to be a lot of competition. Not just from people, but wildlife too. The deer often get the best mushrooms in my local park. If you're a complete beginner, I wouldn't recommend going alone or relying on photos in a book, even the one I've written. There are some really good phone apps for identifying mushrooms, but you can't always rely on getting a good signal in the middle of a wood. If possible, you should go with a group led by an expert. You'll stay safe and learn a lot that way. Conservation is a really important consideration, and you must follow a few basic rules. You should never pick all the mushrooms in one area. Collect only enough for your own needs. Be very careful that you don't trample on young mushrooms or other plants. And make sure you don't pick any mushrooms that are endangered and protected by law. There's been a decline in some varieties of wild mushrooms in this part of the country. Restaurants are becoming more interested in locally sourced food like wild mushrooms, but the biggest problem is that so many new houses have been built in this area in the last 10 years. And more water is being taken from rivers and reservoirs because of this, and mushroom habitats have been destroyed. Anyway, a word of advice on storing mushrooms. Collect them in a brown paper bag, and as soon as you get home, put them in the fridge. They'll be fine for a couple of days, but it's best to cook them as soon as possible. After washing them really carefully first, of course. So, everybody knows what a mushroom tastes like, right? Well, you'll be surprised by the huge variety of wild mushrooms there are. Be adventurous. They're great in so many dishes. Stir-fries, risottos, pasta. But just be aware that some people can react badly to certain varieties, so it's a good idea not to eat huge quantities to begin with. OK, so now I'm going to show you a few examples of poisonous mushrooms.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2.
You will hear a university tutor talking to two students about a presentation they have made in a recent botany seminar. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Well, Anita and Lee, that was an interesting presentation you made about John Chapman.
Thanks.
There are a few points I'd like to run through before you write it up. One thing which you didn't explain was why you decided to do a presentation on this man who spread apple varieties across the US.
Well, ages ago, we were chatting about stuff we'd read as children, and I told Lee the Johnny Appleseed story. I had these American storybooks when I was small. Then when we were looking into the area of domesticated species of plants for our presentation, we realised that the introduction of the apple with the settlers in the US would be a good case study.
And I remembered Chapman, so we looked up the real guy behind the legend.
Right. I think that would have made a good intro.
I thought it was too personal.
Just a couple of minutes would have drawn your listeners in. Anyway, now a more serious point. You didn't mention the sources of some of your information.
We used some books and journal articles and did an internet search and found some good sites.
We've put them on the back of the handout we gave everyone at the end.
Oh, let me see. Oh, here it is. Johnny Appleseed, Man and Myth, 1967. Well, the thing is, you really have to make this explicit when you talk. And anything you show, data you project from your laptop, etc., you must have the source on it.
Right, okay.
At least you have got it all documented. I was a bit concerned about that.
Sorry.
Anyway, now the content of your talk. What your listeners wanted to understand was whether there were apples in the US before the Europeans started to live there. Well, you told us the early settlers had brought young apple trees, but that few of them had thrived because the climate was harsh. But what about native species? I don't think you were very clear about species already there.
According to what I've read, there were some crab apples, but that was all. Everything that people now think of as traditional American apples was species that the Europeans either introduced or bred by chance.
Because they tended to sow seeds rather than use grafting.
Yes, quite. But what to me was fascinating, and I saw most members of your audience start to take notes, was when you discussed how the apple genes spread via the Silk Route into Europe from the wild apple woods of Kazakhstan.
Yes, well, I'd like to have said more about the development of grafting in ancient China as a way of producing predictable varieties. It was so early in history.
But it's the natural development of the original wild apple into new species that people wanted more about, which says a lot for your presentation. You enthused your audience. So now we need to discuss the form your follow-up work will take. Are you going to produce a paper? Or are you thinking of putting it all up on the department website?
I felt we could do both, and we could do a poster of some of the data. But Lee wasn't sure.
No, I think it would be enough to use the website. We can offer a link to our email for queries. That would save time and trees.
I think Lee's right. A poster would be nice, but it'd take too much time.
Okay.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Now, I just want to give you a few pointers about the techniques of your presentation. Mostly, it was good. But there are a few things you need to bear in mind next time you do one. You both managed the hardware, I mean the projector and things, very well indeed, which is always a great help.
Good.
Oh, thanks.
You'd obviously checked it out carefully.
Yes. But unfortunately, we hadn't finished our maps when we did the practice on my computer at home. That's why there was some the wrong way up.
We didn't realise the software on the laptop was a bit different from the one I have.
But you sorted out the problem very quickly and didn't let it fluster you, so it wasn't a big problem. We could all read the map when we needed to.
So it was okay, but we could have done better, we realise.
There was a bit at the end where I felt something didn't go as you'd planned. Am I right?
We had a few maps which we ended up leaving out because we needed to get on to our conclusions.
Yes, it took longer to explain the technical aspects of grafting than we'd expected.
So, sticking to the time limit for each part of our presentation is something we didn't manage at all. Which means we've definitely got to improve before we do another one.
Yes.
Apart from that, well, the handout was perfectly adequate for a seminar like this. It gave all the key information, And, of course, now I realise the sources are listed at the back. But you need to do those references in the correct format, as footnotes, in future.
OK.
Yes, sorry, we will.
And finally, other students will be presenting projects later in the course. I shall be reminding them how well you both spoke, and that no one had any problem hearing or understanding either of you. In that respect, your talk was a model that the others can follow.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. This feedback has been very helpful.
Well done, both of you. See you in a fortnight.
Bye.
Yes, thanks.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
You will hear part of a lecture about urban migration. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon, and welcome to my talk on urban migration today. The world has experienced unprecedented urban growth in the recent decades. As much as 3% of Earth's landmass has been urbanized, an increase of at least 50% over previous estimates. Today, people living in cities already outnumber those in rural areas, and the trend does not appear to be reversing. In addition, cities have larger amounts of carbon consumption than rural areas. This is a result from two major aspects. First, with the increase of urban population around the world, the massive construction of urban infrastructure and residential housing is hard to avoid. Second, urban households have a higher rate of car ownership and use more gasoline products. Even though rural exodus is often negatively judged, there are also benefits of migration shared by the local environment and the society as a whole. Well, firstly, global trends of increasing urban migration and population urbanization can provide opportunities for nature conservations, particularly in regions where deforestation is driven by agriculture. As rural dwellers leave their homes, local forests are left to recover. What's more, it is easier for city dwellers to get around. Living in the country means transport can be very difficult. For instance, after midnight there are no buses or taxis in the countryside. However, there is still a number of public transport modes to choose from in the city. Finally, with more funds and advanced technology, cities endeavour to produce clean energy. New power plants have been built to take harmful methane gas created by the decomposition of rubbish and convert it into electricity. By doing so, an important greenhouse gas is turned into useful energy rather than being directly emitted into the atmosphere. The hustle and bustle of city life offers women the opportunity to explore different professions and pursue their own careers. Women in cities work as engineers, managers, and even football players. This change of roles has affected their marital status and family life. More women are choosing their careers over marriage, which raises the graph of late marriages. As a result, more are remaining single well into their late 30s. They want to be independent and earn money on their own. It is also easier for them to get a promotion while working in the city. Women are slowly achieving wider participation at work, while in rural areas, the mindset is still very conservative. However, cities also change the way that humans interact with each other and the environment, often causing multiple problems. In general, urban wages are significantly higher, so moving to the city is an opportunity to earn what was impossible in rural areas. However, the wage difference is often offset by the higher cost of living and absence of self-produced goods, including subsistence farming. A sizable proportion of new corners attach greater importance to money and gradually abandon their former way of life, thus risking losing their culture. These new city residents are also faced with another problem. According to statistics, crime rates are significantly higher in densely populated urban regions than in rural areas. For instance, property crime rates in our metropolitan areas are 3 to 4 times as high in comparison to the rates in rural communities. Immigrants, upon arrival into cities, typically move into the poor, blighted neighborhoods because that is where they can afford to live. Crime in these areas is high and reflects poor living conditions, as these neighborhoods experience great levels of poverty. This pattern also occurs for violent crimes, which is much more common in large urban areas than elsewhere. In addition, traffic congestion and industrial manufacturing are prominent features of the urban landscape, which take their toll on the natural environment and those who depend on it. Air pollution from both cars and factory emissions affect the health of countless urban residents. Rural to urban migration can boost the urban economy. With a better economy, cities provide their residents with better welfare, but the concentration of services and facilities, such as education, health, and technology in urban areas, inevitably contributes to greater energy consumption. Another problem with life in the city is traffic congestion. It makes people late to work, and thus stresses us out before we even get there. Deliveries can't arrive on time, gas costs money. The quality of life of those commuters starts to decline. What's worse is that if congestion makes it harder to match the right workers to the best jobs, it is economically inefficient as well.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.